there's a lot of anger out there, I think, even among Catholic men who maybe converted to the Catholic faith because they thought it was going to be the father they never had, with the strong authority and the clear answers and tell me what to do, and then their disillusionment sets in.
All right, Sam Guzman, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Sword and Spade podcast. I'm really looking forward to this because you and I are such old friends at this point. Now, not as if we're in the same city, we know each other, but we've been comparing notes since, I think, 2011 or 12. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I think it was probably 2012 or 2013. I mean, okay. I started the Catholic Gentleman in 2013, so I'm thinking it's probably around that time.
Must have been there.
13 years at least.
So not only that, though, before, as we were getting ready clumsily, and we're like two old guys trying to get our tech working, not that we're that old, but you were complaining about your hearing being gone, and I almost, going away, and I almost started talking about my eyes. When I turned 40, it was like, oh, now I can't see things, and I had to go get glasses. And then I realized, yep, that's it. We're now the old guys of the Catholic man internet stuff. I mean, we might as well complain about kids these days, which we'll get to that.
Right. So we will be complaining. Yeah.
I'm gonna give though. The quick history because you and I both we have published books and we're both on each other's on the back, I think, little blurbs. We were kind of unfolding, as exploring, thinking about like the crisis of masculinity. We've been, I recall just having amazing conversations with you, in the past. So in case our listeners aren't old enough, which is funny, that, when we were started, we were both involved with two of the big websites that sort of were like, I would say one of the beginning places of like, I'm going to now use the term manosphere. It didn't exist then, but it was like Catholic masculine recovery, which some people, it got really weird and old for some people and really quickly. But, there was websites as early as I think like 06, 07, like the Art of Manliness, for like the secular world, and right. there was books that were coming out like Wild at Heart for the Protestants, and as I recall, I just had this idea of working with fraternists, like, we need like an Art of Manliness for Catholics, and so I started just reaching out to people. I started like searching around, and I think I found something called like Whiskey Catholic. I don't think they're around anymore. I don't know. There was this Catholic Gentleman. And then there was this group of guys that was called Those Catholic Men, which was like some seminarians and a priest. And in case anyone's wondering, that group of guys is what Exodus 90 came out of, and the website Those Catholic Men. But funny thing is, I recall that Those Catholic Men, when I got a hold of them, were angry at this guy Sam for launching the CatholicGentleman.net because they owned CatholicGentleman.com, and that was going to be the name of their website. But you beat them to the internet. With a cooler logo too. I mean, the whole like, pipes cross, triple tiara papal thing. Do you remember this? I mean, this is a thing, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember. I mean, they wanted to like, bring me under their umbrella and pay me every month to write for them. And I was like, no, I have this vision for the Catholic Gentleman. Like, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And, yeah, they weren't too happy about it at the time. I mean, they were cordial, but like I could tell they were a little frustrated. But yeah, I remember those early conversations, and
I remember I kind of existed between you guys because I'd write for you, I'd write for them, and anyway, now I think it's all like a big funny thing. It is funny at this point. But what I'd like to make fun of us a little bit. And here's why. I don't know, sometime around like 2018 or 19, Those Catholic Men was doing great. It's like, I don't know, 20,000 views or something a day or a month. I don't even know. It was a lot. And I was writing for the Catholic Gentleman, and you had a big the website and the social media was going. And honestly, like I had a crisis, like it was weirding me out. And I mostly like the social media. I'm like, I'm just going to get out of here. I'm going to I'm still going to be writing. I'm going to do stuff. I actually got the book done, Leaving Boyhood Behind. And I've just been out of it for a while. I've just been out of it. But recently, our new content editor for Sword and Spade magazine, and if you don't recall, because actually you quit Sword and Spade magazine. I called you. I'm like, Sam, you just quit the best Catholic. Like, what kind of? You think you're the only voice out? Anyway, you quit it. I remember calling you. But Sword and Spade magazine has been growing. It's like that was what I decided. Like we just need to get in the hands of people and back in real life and off the screens, and that was like our effort in that. We have a new content editor. Trey Bailey, who was like, you know what though, Jason, you have to go in the matrix to escape the matrix. So let's start a Substack for Sword and Spade to feature some old, because we've got now like 7 years of really great, stuff. And so I get on Substack and I discover there's all these like new Catholic man. I guess they're called, I don't know what they're called in Substacks. Stacks. They're called Substacks. So I'm poking around. Yeah. And I'm reading them and I see that they're like exploding and you gotta like pay to be some of the subscribers and some of them are, and I'm just like, what are people talking about? And they're talking about, maybe you should dress like a grown up. You should probably have some self-mastery. Virtue and orthodoxy is important. You should love your family. And I'm reading, I'm like, well, this sounds familiar. It's just kind of a new, and then I one of these guys I'm reaching out. I'm not going to name names or anything, but I'm reaching out and I'm scratching the surface of, these look pretty good. Where are these guys getting their stuff from? And I realize these are guys that most of them are new converts. They have like under 4 children that are probably under the age of like 8 or 6. Maybe they have 2 kids, and they are posting and presenting as the sages that have figured it out. And I thought, this is so dumb. This is so dumb because now my children are older. I'm now helping guide them into adulthood. And I looked to completely different places for wisdom. And it's like, it can't be these guys because they don't have it. Because they haven't done it. So they don't, and when I say they don't know what they're talking about, I mean that in the Thomistic sense that they don't know it from sense experience. A lot of them are new converts, young families, and big platforms. And I thought, what were me and Sam doing all those years ago? Because that was us, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Absolutely.
I mean, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had 1 kid when I started the Catholic Gentleman. So,
yeah.
I knew nothing.
Well, I want to ask you about this now because when we started, all right, let's get back. Sword and Spade made the decision, let's get back out there to try to bring some of this stuff that we've been doing sort of on the print page. Let's get back online. And it was like, all right, we're going to do it, but we're only going to use the matrix to escape the matrix. And I was really unaware of this until recently. I just haven't been plugged in. The rise of the so-called manosphere, like the whole, like be manly, be masculine. Like it's not new anymore to talk about that. It's in fact, the more I look, I'm like, wow, this is everywhere. And it actually, some of the young guys at my parish asked me, hey, you need to go check out this like Nick Fuentes guy. And I had no idea who this is. So I go and now I know, I understand he's big in the news now and I don't want to get on a discussion, but I went and looked and I went back to these guys. I said, guys, he's unmarried, like no children, and he's sensational, but like, where are you looking for wisdom? And that was where it really occurred to me. I was watching these young guys. They're really just kind of looking online. So, and then, all the like YouTube controversies and like the media personalities, it's different now than in 2013 when we were just publishing some articles. Yeah. So what's your perspective as someone now? I mean, how old are your kids now?
My oldest is about to turn 14. Yeah,
okay.
And
so you're in a different
4. So
all right, you're in a different era. So
definitely in a different stage of life. Yeah.
What's your take? And you can make fun of us too in 2013, 14, telling the world all the wisdom that we had gained from 2 years of being Catholic.
Yeah.
What's your
Yeah.
take
The new
on where
convert zeal is there for
the
sure.
new convert zeal and the microphone of the internet? Like, what's your take on the state of like Catholic men and because I know there's a lot of people that really are excited and about what's happening with like the digital landscape. I'm maybe less so, but maybe just because I'm jaded or something. But what's your take on sort of where things have been, Catholic men, the internet, influencers? Like, where are you? And we'll talk more about what you're doing now in your profession with counseling. But like, how do you think that's going for us as Catholics, as the church?
Yeah. Well, I see a real, um, yes, positive interest in rediscovering masculinity. It's grown by leaps and bounds since, 2013 or so when I started the Catholic Gentleman. I mean, I think there was back then just kind of a low ebb of energy around that whole topic. I mean, there were certainly apostolates and things like that that were trying to capture the masculine audience. But there was online. There was very little, almost nothing, in fact. Um, and so since then, I've seen an explosion of interest in what does it mean to be a Catholic man? What does holiness for a man look like? So that's a good sign, like as far as I'm concerned, that this kind of went from the fringes when you and I started to being something much more mainstream, much more talked about in the Catholic world. So I want to acknowledge that, but also, yeah, I see um, kind of a dark side emerging almost. And I would say if I could use one word to characterize it, it would be kind of resentment,
Hmm.
where there's a lot of anger out there, I think, even among Catholic men who maybe converted to the Catholic faith because they thought it was going to be the father they never had,
Yeah.
with the strong authority and the clear answers and tell me what to do, and then there disillusionment sets in, and so there
Yeah.
can be kind of a bitterness. There's also kind of an ugly streak of and I should say the resentment towards the church often manifests as like an extreme like fundamentalism or trad I'm a trad Catholic or whatever, and like we're gonna live in this little corner, this little enclave over here, and reject 99% of the rest of the church. We're gonna hold our nose anytime we talk about the Pope. Like we're just gonna exist in our own little enclaves, and that's a whole nother topic. But there's also a huge resentment, I think, against women, and that I've seen grow up in the manosphere. It's all their fault. It's right, like it's all women's fault, um, or like they're like women are degraded, or like their role is very narrow and limited. Basically to scratch my sexual itch whenever I have it. Not trying to be crude, but that's the way a lot of these guys talk about it, and essentially be um, to fulfill my every women desire and support me in that. And I could go down that rabbit trail very easily. But I see a lot of resentment, and you see this in a lot of like the red pill communities. Like Andrew Tate and things like that. Like women are essentially to be conquered and used, but they have no dignity. But there's like a Catholic version of that almost,
Yeah.
and that's kind of an ugly thing. And I've seen that growing. And even one book came out that was really horrifying to me, and unfortunately it was pulled from the market. But but it's still like the contents of it were atrocious in the way that it was talking about some of these topics. So there's a dark side kind of coming forward. And I think it's not just in the Catholic world, but it's in the culture at large of just resentment, bitterness, and 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 that certainly infected the Catholic manosphere, if you want to use that word, as well. And it is disturbing to me,
Yeah.
because that's the whole point of the Catholic gentleman was that gentleness, that kindness, that, for lack of a better word, modern chivalry. That was something I was trying to recapture in those early days.
Yeah. There's something, I mean, to keep going on what you're saying, there's something so simple about the answers provided.
Yeah.
that, as anyone who has, I don't know, been married or had children knows, there's significantly more nuance. And I don't mean that in like we just need to keep talking until we arrive at a pleasant, what I mean is the work of marriage and fathering is work. And anyone who simplifies it into, they sort of bring it into these manageable bits of knowledge that exists
Yeah.
as facts, but without the wisdom of experience. So,
Right.
the corollary would be the way that a so-called conspiracy theory, and I know, is the joke is if give a conspiracy theory 6 months and it's true, whatever is true or not true as some of these ideas or theories are. The point is that the in a time of chaos and inner and outer turmoil in a lot of men, which is coming from things like the sexual revolution, divorce, abuse, but then it gets writ large on the entire world. And it gets, there's actual, you feel just like abused by your bishops in the church. You feel forgotten, overlooked, neglected, dismissed. The way that a conspiracy theory provides you an answer that gives you a form of power. I see a grave danger, and I think we don't have to mention it. I think I know the book you're talking about. I'm reading them. This is from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about exactly, or is providing something that, maybe is a limited understanding or a limited experience, and providing it as a sort of formulaic overlay that you can put in life.
Yeah.
But the Manosphere has provided, particularly in the realm of the relationship of men and women, it lacks theological, philosophical, experiential reality. It's so silly, but it provides
Right.
young men that are deeply insecure. Because this is my, the thesis of Leaving Boyhood Behind is that the deep plague of insecurity comes from a form of immaturity, comes from a form of, a
Yes.
lack of initiation. Well, if you have that and your inner man is really weak, can you imagine being
Yep.
provided by an influencer? You know what the problem is? Your wife's not listening to you. Because if she was just
Exactly. Yeah.
doing what you say, and then you try to communicate that to a wife. And anyone who thinks, well, I'm
Right.
sidestepping the headship of a man is completely wrong, because and this came from, like the family is not a kingdom. The family's
Right.
not a kingdom. This is like men who have the kingship mentality. It's like, no, it's not a kingdom. It's a body. And the body has a head. And Aquinas says the head, the intellect, cannot function without the proper input in the relationship with the senses, which is the
Right.
bodiliness of the woman. So in a sense, you have to listen to your wife in order to know what to
Yeah.
do. So if you think you're going to
Right.
barge in from work where I tell people what to do, and then I'm going to go home and I tell people what to do, and that's how bodies work. Well, okay, how's that
Right.
working for just commanding your body to do what you want to do? Then why doesn't that work? Which we know it doesn't, because we have passions and it requires more integration of that body. So anyway, I agree. What I see is easy, simple answers. They get traded around in sort of quick memes,
Yeah.
and shorts, and it lacks. Aquinas says the only way you actually arrive at true prudence, like the ability to take the right action, is through through knowing experience. And I guess a lot of what I saw when I was poking around Substack is like, this is great regurgitated wisdom that you copied and pasted and rehashed in your own words. And it's good. I'm not opposed to it. But I can't look to you as a true mentor, right? Because I need
Right.
mentors. I need the mentorship of culture. I need the mentorship of brotherhood and fatherhood. And I can't look to you because you don't know what you're talking about. And I don't mean to be mean. It's just you
Right.
don't know what you're talking about. So the fact that you have an audience might be bad for me, but it's probably overwhelmingly going to be bad for you, because you get to rack up a sense of affirmation for your wisdom based on a metric that's not from God. It's from
Right.
Google Analytics. And I'm not saying that everyone who
Exactly.
gets a lot of views is bad, but I'm saying that for you to gauge your own wisdom and insights based on your audience is going to be devastating for your soul and potentially the audience.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And the internet rewards shock and awe obscene you sound, the more extreme you sound, the more likely you are to have followers.
Mm-hmm.
And like you're saying, like having those followers doesn't mean that you're right.
Yeah.
In fact, very often it can mean that you're just being obnoxious or you're just being immature. But I think there's a couple things that you said that I want to come back to, and one of those is this idea of immature, weak men who have no control over their passions, essentially being given a permission slip or empowered by these online influencers to use, abuse, subjugate, disregard their wives, and essentially blame them for all of the problems in their marriage. And that's incredibly damaging, and it actually makes me angry because that's the exact opposite of God's intention for a husband. He is to love and protect his wife, not use her to satisfy his every whim and to make himself feel better about himself because he never had a father, in his life, a strong father figure. And I could definitely go on about that. But the other word that I think you used multiple times now that I think is really key is wisdom. We are drowning in information. We have more information available in our fingertips than anyone, even the greatest scholars, had in the ancient world. And it's instantly accessible. If I want to read the contents of ancient Sumerian tablets, I can do that within seconds, and yet we are not growing wise. And ever since I was very young, I would read like the book of Proverbs. We didn't have Ecclesiasticus or anything like that back then, and when I was a Protestant, but
Yeah.
I would
You
read the
didn't
book
have
of
it. You didn't
Proverbs,
have it.
and and it's like wisdom cries in the streets, like listen. And at the time I was, 13 years old or something. I didn't know anything about what wisdom actually meant, but it planted a seed in me that exists to this day, that my goal, my aspiration in life is maybe someday to become a wise man, to strive for wisdom, not just knowledge. And what is wisdom? Yeah, it's rooted in experience, absolutely. And it's kind of hard to define what even like constitutes wisdom sometimes, because it's like it when you have it kind of thing, or maybe you don't know it when you have it. You know how little you know. It's like humility when it comes to knowledge. And but anyway, to strive to be a wise man, anyone can parrot the facts. And yes, I admit, when I started the Catholic Gentleman, I was parroting a lot of things. Some of it was based on my experience, absolutely, but a lot of it was just parroted. But I've grown since then, and I hope I still grow for the rest of my life. And maybe on my deathbed, I can say I've gained a little bit of wisdom. But if I'm truly wise, then I won't say that. I'll say I know nothing. But let's strive for depth. Let's strive for genuine wisdom. The wisdom that comes from the Holy Spirit, the wisdom that comes from lived experience. And let's just refuse to be shallow and trite with our canned answers. Like you said, oversimplify sometimes problems that are very complex, that don't have easy answers. Mm-hmm. And let's be okay with that. Like there's an unknowing in wisdom that is very healthy.
Yeah. I can think of, I hope you have these men in your life. I have them. And maybe that was part of the like retreating somewhat from the internet is when I see a man of wisdom, he is contented in a way that's enviable, and he has no need, a strange lack of need for anyone to tell anyone anything. Yet if you can go to him, like he's just overflowing with stuff. I want to know how you came to know that, and there are authors that I love that seemingly are able to both write and teach and present and their humility share wisdom. Like, Wendell Berry is my favorite author. He just has a way of, and he speaks, obviously from a lot of experience. It makes me think, though, I think Aquinas says that, and it's in the virtue of studiositas, of study. And he says that man has a desire to know, right? His intellect is like is a void, it's an open mouth, and what it wants is truth. And he says, but there's a problem that the way God has created us to arrive at truth. And I think, wisdom is where, like, again, we're not going to give the quick definitions here because you and I don't have it yet. We're working on it, maybe by our deathbed. But, when truth sort of sinks into your being, when who you are, you operate in truth, in reality, which is virtue. He says to arrive at that, the problem is being human, it requires work. It requires that sort of discursive reasoning, trial and error, comparing. And he says, and this is in kind of, there's certain virtues like faith that help us make leaps so that we don't have to, there's certain leaps we'll never make. We'll never by our natural reason arrive at the Trinity. Once we get there, it makes sense, makes sense. It rings true. But we don't have to reason to every faith allows us to know more about God by him just giving us that knowledge, that illuminating our minds so we can see. Most knowledge, however, takes real work. Takes real conversation. And I think another part of not that we're just going to be two old guys complaining about influence, but it allows you to this quick, and it uses the language of revelation. Have you ever seen, I've noticed like the internet or like, especially like YouTube, it looks at us like we're children, like, right? Like the face, you're not going to believe what I just discovered. They didn't want you to know this. It's not what and then in 3 minutes, you've bypassed all the work and like, I'm just going to reveal it to you. Yeah. And they used like, look at how many times the word reveal, like for a Catholic, revelation is what God does to help us arrive at truth about himself that we can't know in any other way. When we talk about, I've got a revelation for the internet, I think it's actually dangerous. We're bypassing the work of how knowledge and wisdom is naturally gained, and i.e. the way God intended us to gain it. And it's giving you, again, that simplistic life hack. Like I'm going to, because I remember you actually wrote me, I wrote an article about there's no life hacks. And you wrote me like, hey, that's an important nuance. There is no hack. Your mind, the world is not a computer program that you can cheat code. There's no life hacks. There's only experience and wisdom, which is gained slowly. But these things promise the rapid fire approach.
Exactly. And I think that's one element of wisdom that is very unpopular. And that's that it often comes through hardship or suffering. Like some of the wisest people of the 20th century lived through World War II and the trauma of that. Even like Viktor Frankl, one of the psychologists, he was a Jew that lived through, I think it was Auschwitz or one of those concentration camps, but he came out of it and wrote a book that's considered a classic to this day, Man's Search for Meaning. And in it, he articulates a level of wisdom that he gained through suffering. This wasn't theoretical for him, and he wrote another book later on called, Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. And when he drops those gems of wisdom, he didn't get them off of X or Threads or Instagram. They came from a heart that had integrated very painful experiences and then extracted a deep level of meaning from them. And that's something that I think that is often missing is, like you said, there are no hacks. Sometimes it's hard to gain wisdom. Sometimes it's like a treasure extracted from a lot of pain, and I think as we grow older, not that you in any way seek or desire hardship, but hardship just comes to you. It's just baked into any kind of life that's worth living. Because, you can be safe. You can never leave your apartment. Like a lot of these young guys in Japan who never leave their apartment. They just watch porn and order everything delivered to their house. And they just never leave. And they're maybe safer. But is their life in any way meaningful or significant? Absolutely not. Like, of course, at a meta level, perhaps. But like they're not going to make any impact on the world. So if you're going to launch out and you're going to make a difference for the kingdom of God, you're going to suffer. But wisdom's going to come through that if you allow it to.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the difference, I think, between what we're talking about, like the manosphere that's full of resentment and bitterness versus wisdom. Those are
Hmm.
really your two choices because you're
Yeah.
going to go through hard stuff and it's either going to make you bitter or better.
Yeah. And I think that's the kids and I, well, we have a joke in our family. It's like anything but the cross because somehow,
Yeah.
somehow that's the only
Yeah.
way. I mean, in God's providence, that is the only way. And I think of maybe the other side of the manosphere is the what do they call it? The mommy blogs. I don't know. They have their own. But early on, we're homeschooling. We're not gonna fall into the pitfalls of our parents. We're gonna just have this perfect oasis on our homestead and it's only actually through like actually schooling, educating, forming young people. I remember my wife, just the way we would talk about our home education when our kids were 6 versus now.
Yeah.
People are like, "Do you know how to
Yeah.
homeschool?" And we're like, "No, we don't. We don't know how." Whereas before, we know how. We've yeah. Let me tell you the principles. Like I got John Senior on long. We've read it all. Charlotte Mason. Like we're covered. Let me tell you how people learn and what the outcome will be. The outcome will be this. I promise. And you get the other side of it. And you're like, I don't know what I'm talking about. Not. And
Yeah.
this is not at all. My children are wonderful. I don't want to make it sound like my wife is a total and absolute success, but we would both say like we don't know now the mystery of life is actually unfolded a little bit more. Not
Yes.
not totally. Obviously, we have a lot more to live, but we just speak about it differently, and that's how I recognize someone honestly with wisdom is they speak about it probably with less confidence, and
Yes.
maybe a little
Yes.
nuance. Um, so I want to ask you then how. I mean, I didn't really follow. I only knew this. Just so everyone's clear, the Catholic Gentleman is now essentially being run by our friend John, who is one of these guys of like he's actively engaged in the internet and all this stuff, and he's humble and holy. I enjoy every time I'm with him. I'm like, yeah, this guy is humble and holy, and just open it, but also zealous and like let's get after it. And he's got a little bit more of like the American budding CEO in him than I do. I'm like, whatever, we're good. Um, but you're not running that full time at all. I mean, you never were full time, but
No.
it's being even run.
No,
You're
no.
you're kind of a side hustle to the Catholic. Who are you? You're not the Catholic Gentleman anymore, Sam. You're just Sam. Um,
Oh man.
I know. I'm
I
sorry.
always
I know.
liked being the Catholic
I know.
gentleman.
Well, you're still. Isn't that still you on the cover of the book? I mean, come on, that's still you.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Everyone always points out my crooked bow tie. So
that's how you know you. That's the first sign of not a faux tie is that it's crooked. That's important.
that's
It's got life to it. Um, but how did you? I don't know this story. I know that you got involved with studying to become a counselor. Is that is
yes.
that the right phrase? That's the right vocabulary.
Yeah,
And
counselor. Yeah, I mean, that journey began in late 2019. So
yeah, why did you do that?
that is a great question. So just rewinding a little bit, my career arc was started off in like the nonprofit world, but then there was some other jobs in there that ended up leading me into marketing.
Mhm.
But along the way, I worked for Pro Life Wisconsin, which was a statewide pro life organization, and did communications for them, which was basically nonprofit marketing. And then went from there to Covenant, which many of you are probably familiar with, the anti-pornography software company, and did marketing for them for about 7 years. But both at Pro Life Wisconsin and at Covenant, there was just this growing desire to help people because in abortion, there's a lot of pain and trauma and like things like that that lead women to abortion. But then the abortion itself can actually be another trauma in their life, another wound in their life. And kind of seeing this up close in my day-to-day work and how people were impacted by this, the different systems and like family systems and things that and drug addiction and things like that that would lead people to abortion. It's like, man, and I just always had a heart to help, but I was kind of behind a computer screen.
Hmm.
And same with Covenant Eyes, like a lot of terrible stories you would hear, but also stories of hope and redemption. And addiction itself too, like pornography addiction and things like that. okay, this is actually like something that can be understood. There's actually psychological processes going on here. And so I just was learning more and more as part of my research to work at Covenant Eyes and be an effective marketer for their product, understanding the problems that people faced and what solutions that they needed. But still, like, it never really occurred to me to like pursue counseling. Um, my initial interest was psychology, just because I thought, hey, like if I have an understanding of psychology and how these things like addiction work, it'll make me a lot better of a marketer. So I enrolled at Divine Mercy University, which is kind of like the premier Catholic mental health graduate school,
Mm-hmm.
and initially enrolled in their psychology degree program. But after only about like 2 classes, I realized I really wanted to get out from behind a screen and help people one to one. And so I did some research on counseling and what's required there, and enrolled, kind of switched to their counseling program, and that's kind of been the journey ever since 2020. And I've been working for myself as a counselor for about 2 years now.
Oh, wow.
But so yeah.
Okay,
It
so
was
then
a long journey. It was a difficult journey. Yeah.
yeah. Now that you've brought up something like, oh yeah, I recall you telling me about the Divine Mercy and I have
That's
had,
right.
yeah. So I'd like to talk to you about the state of sort of our understanding of mental health, and perhaps some of the excesses we see and what some authors, I think it was Nick Lash, whatever his first name, the Therapeutic Society, sort of,
Yeah.
and then versus like, because there are, in the world of men, one thing I would say is, there's sort of like men that know they're broken and they need some help and they'll go to a counselor. And then there's a lot, they're like, actually, you just need to like go to the gym and quit being a wuss. And the thing that's really obvious to me though, because some people say, well, they didn't have counselors and therapists in the past. And I say, well, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Well, they kind of did. I mean, depends on how you think about it, how you're defining it. Or they'll say, oh, well, all you really need is confessional. So I say, well, look, I'm sorry that the sexual revolution has done a number, just that itself. And the fact is, I have seen and witnessed so often, even in my own life. I have a good friend of mine who was part of the founding of Fraternis is actually Bob Schutz, who many people know, JB2 Healing Center.
Yeah.
That it really helped. I mean, early on, my wife and I went through this training. It was part of like Fraternis onboarding back in the day. We don't do it anymore. We should, but it was just, like, hey, when you're in an argument, here's what's actually going on. And that was early in our marriage. And like, man, we're really good at arguing now. I mean, we just like, we get to it. And it's fruitful, and then we reconcile. But so I would describe the Therapeutic Society that, this is Lash, Jonathan Lash. This is maybe even a little bit of Neil Postman, which is, and I write about it in Leaving Boyhood Behind, in the second edition, which is a society that, post 60s, when I would argue the children won the culture war. So there was sort of a war between parents and kids. Parents were aborting their children and children were protesting their parents. And, they were at war with one another. Parents, and I a lot of people like to blame hippies, and like that sort of, so I actually blame the parents equally. This was the same era as divorce, contraception, and abortion. So there's a mutual war going on in the family between generations. And then I would say the kids won. In the 70s. And then by the 80s, you have the rise of something we had never heard of, which is like self-esteem. And I did like a little word search on the use of that, with the Google tool. It's like unheard of, and now it's everywhere. And Offspring is writing entire albums on self-esteem. And it's the rise of what they called the Therapeutic Society, which is the purpose of the world is to make me feel better about my problems. And that gets even off put onto God, that God is God when he helps me with my problems and he helps me feel better. And then a lot of people look at the idea of therapy, which I know counseling, therapy, psychology, these are all different, but A lot of people are just going to picture, somebody sitting in this chair, getting a good talking to or listening to. That the therapeutic society it's trying to help you feel better about your problems. There's that, but then there's the very real, I think of Conrad Barr's, Thomas Aquinas, like there's real insights that we have now from the psychological studies, from mental health studies, that I would liken to the early church, some of the early church saying, well, we don't need philosophy because we have the scriptures, what hath Athens to do with Jerusalem? But actually integrating this worldly knowledge of philosophy into the church's understanding of reality has borne, centuries of fruit. We know this to be true. Augustine being the first and prime example of integrating the forms of wisdom that he gained in Greco-Roman philosophy, bring it into theology. And, we know the fruits of that. It seems like we're in an era now where especially because there's so much brokenness, we have the internet rewiring our brain, literally, and just a lot of pain out there and insecurity, especially in men, that I'm like, well, we can't dismiss the wisdom we're gaining from that, even if there's an excess of it, maybe in this, therapeutic, please make me feel better, doctor, which maybe will eschew things like self-mastery, ownership, the things you actually do have or ought to have active control over. But then the other side of it is, no, we're actually really broken. And until we arrive at some healing and get some help, we're really stunted. So what has been your experience? All that we just said about the foolish wisdom we thought we had in 2013 and 14, and now, and now, going through, I'm sure, your own crosses and struggles, along with having now a couple years of experience. I mean, I could even hear in your answers earlier talking about the young, like you're dealing with men that are, needing counseling. So how do you see those? This is a totally loaded question with a 7-minute monologue preceding it, but how would you explain to maybe starting with the skeptics? Like we don't need like a bunch of therapeutic guys in their offices telling us how to live the faith. The saints didn't need that. So how are you going to help me?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll say is that I think a lot of people denigrate mental health or therapy or whatever you want to call it because there's an inherent discomfort with looking inward in any way. And I would guess the vast majority of people who criticize it are either not understanding what it is, or if they do understand what it is, they're afraid to look inside. And it is uncomfortable when you open that door to kind of your inner world and what's going on there. But it's, I don't want to get off on a philosophical discourse on, the 20th century and everything. But I think the rise of therapeutic culture, I do attribute to, in large degree, World War I and World War II. Because at that time, there were these big, powerful, stabilizing forces prior to that, I should say, such as the Catholic Church, these institutions that gave people a sense of meaning. And I don't say that just in like a Marxian, opiate of the masses kind of way. Like it was real. It was in a sense of purpose. And like, there was this sense that we may just be like cogs in a machine, but this machine is a very meaningful machine. And like society is built on this grand, you even see it in the buildings. Like a post office was like a glorious thing back in 1908. Like there was just this sense that things were meaningful. Society had structure and hierarchy, and we all are playing our part. And so I might just be, a mail delivery guy, but like it has a sense of purpose and meaning to it. And I could do that for 40 years because my job matters, Yeah. And of course, religiously as well. There was a much higher degree of religious affiliation that gave people, again, a sense of being part of something bigger than themselves. But then you go into like World War I and World War II, and it's like traumatic for the whole world. Like, it's just like a massive trauma. And I think what happens is a lot of those institutions and sources of guidance and meaning and wisdom that people used to look to collapsed. Like people completely lost faith in them. And so instead of like feeling like a very small but significant part of something much bigger than yourself, it's like everything collapsed in on you. Like suddenly your whole world was yourself. You weren't serving something higher and bigger and more noble. It became all about you and your felt needs. And so I think, yeah, going into the 50s and 60s, kind of post World War II, it's like we can't trust the church to save us anymore. We can't trust the government to save us. We can't trust anything that we used to put our trust in. It's like the bottom has dropped out of everything. And some of it might have been cynicism, some of it might have been bitterness. But it was like, okay, now I'm like my whole world. I'm like the center of my world. Instead of serving something higher, I'm serving myself, essentially. And how can I fix me? And I think it's a sense of powerlessness towards like the bigger problems in the world, but like I can focus on myself, which there's a healthy thing, like a healthy version of that, right? Where you recognize it starts with you. But I think what is like all of our personal individual problems suddenly became all consuming. And like this new priesthood of therapists kind of stepped in. And thank God, like truly, the way psychiatrists and therapists used to be held in such esteem back in like the 60s and 70s, maybe even into the 80s, like that's kind of collapsed. But they used to be almost held as like godlike figures. That
they really cracked the code.
Yeah, because they knew way more about you than you knew about yourself. And like, you know, they were going to tell you how it was and what to do and all of these things. And it was literally like almost held in like religious veneration, you know, and we've come a long way from that. You know, it's not the way it is anymore. But at any rate, it became like this new priestly caste almost, which is why I think a lot of people turned off, like especially religious people shied away from anything to do with psychology or therapy because it was like a competitor to religion for a time. But I'll wrap things up here. But the point being that the pendulum swung from like serving something higher and bigger to kind of focusing on inward on yourself. And there were definitely like, I don't want to, you know, I'm a therapist, right? I'm not going to knock that. Like, I think there is value in knowing yourself, as Socrates said, know thyself, right? Like, that's like the beginning of genuine virtue, I think, is like understanding what's really going on inside. But okay, so fast forwarding to today, there are real benefits to psychology. There are real benefits to understanding why you do what you do. I genuinely believe like a lot of what we do is driven by unconscious forces that we're not even aware of, but that shape us and mold our decisions. So a lot of healing begins when we begin to make the unconscious conscious. We kind of turn that little spotlight of attention from the outer world to the inner world, and all of a sudden, like a pattern or a behavior that was formerly running our life because we didn't know it was there is now brought into conscious awareness. And as it's brought into conscious awareness, we have more freedom to choose how we respond. So for example, let's say a guy bumps into you on the sidewalk and you get really angry, like a huge anger, you know, like almost disproportionate anger. Like you just want to go over and punch that guy because he bumped into you, you know, like what's driving that? Well, until you look inward and examine it, it's never going to change. Like you could try to outmuscle it or outwill it, but it's not going to change. You might have some limited success, but you turn that spotlight inward. What is the anger coming from? Well, maybe you had like an abusive father or something, and the anger comes from the helplessness that you felt as you were, you know, and now the anger wants power. Like it doesn't want to be a victim anymore. It wants to lash out or lash back, you know, and I'm just making up that scenario. But the point being, once it moves from the unconscious force that's controlling you to a conscious pattern that can be understood, then that freedom grows and we can choose virtue. We can choose restraint. We can choose to maybe even address the pain of that childhood experience. And then the angry behavior that's trying to address the helplessness resolves on its own because that wound has kind of been resolved and healed.
Yeah.
So to me,
I
it
mean,
makes it aligns. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I think, well, I mean, the greatest defense of what you just said is as a form of not, and this has been my experience, it is not a form of someone, you being able, I think this is the way it would get disparaged, and rightly so, because I'm sure this exists. I know it exists. I can hear it on these NPR interviews. I'm like, oh, I'm talking to my therapist, and I found out how everyone was to blame but me.
Yeah.
So as a form of self-knowledge, it's very easy to rehabilitate in someone's mind what's actually happening with good understanding of, and we can use words that make them feel better, right? This, like, Conrad Bars was good at this. Like, let's put some Thomistic language so that you understand what's going on in your intellect, so that your will can properly respond to your passions. But the greatest example of this is Augustine. I mean, St. Augustine's Confessions is the longest therapeutic screed I've ever heard. I mean, I'm just joking. It is him wrestling with how he became what he is. And he speaks about how God, we did an issue on self-knowledge on this, and we talked about, Sword and Spade did, and we talked about in there how the quote from Augustine where God keeps turning him back to himself. He won't let him escape himself. And for the progress he makes as a saint, because he's not like an Aquinas or John the Apostle, who sort of maintained innocence up until wisdom. Augustine is one who drank from the gutter before he had the springs of life, right? And God had to take him back. And that's what the confessions are, is him going back. And it is very much, it's therapeutic for him to describe how he became who he is in the reality, because the delusion, and I would say this is just across the board of men, is them, and myself included, is thinking that the way we respond and react is either thanks to our own achievement or objective reasoning. And we're just a reasonable person. Where you said it right. It is necessary and healthy to discover and unearth why you react the way you do. And when Augustine keeps turning back to his experience of lust, of losing his father, of his, like, all these things, the death of friends, the death of his mom, it's actually him coming to grips with why he is the way he is, and the interplay of grace and God keep turning him back to these things. Also want to bring this up to you just as a question, or a thought, or one more comment. That what you're saying is, when you really understand this, on the issue of self-knowledge, we did a deep dive into the temperaments, which I know are not always completely adequate, but I know, looking at my wife and I having good long discussions at, like, the classical temperaments, the four humors, as they're called, helps one to see, wow, the things that I would describe, or I would have a sense that I excel at, right? So I'm pretty phlegmatic. So, like, I'm pretty naturally peaceful. Like, and I could look at that and go, look, I'm peaceful like Jesus, because I'm so virtuous. Look at my peacefulness. Whereas my wife, very melancholic, choleric, not peaceful naturally. Whereas the peacefulness that she has with true self-knowledge is actually hard won. Whereas mine's easy. Right. It comes easy for me. And this is where, when I talk to men for whom maybe they are super choleric, right? And they're able to achieve their goals, and they look at someone who doesn't achieve the goals and have the self-mastery, and they think, and I really do think we think this way, I am better than that person. Which is actually, no, you're just excel. That's like the natural athlete thinking he is better than the athlete who is as good as him but had to work harder. The athlete that had to work harder to gain the virtue is significantly has a much better character than the one for whom it comes easily. So in this whole realm of self-knowledge, I think it is, going back to the internet stuff we're talking about, and the easy, false pseudo-wisdom. The work of self-knowledge is also it goes hand in hand with the work of holiness in a way that cannot be avoided. So Dietrich von Hildebrand says in his book, The Transformation of Christ, every encounter with God is an encounter with self-knowledge. all of them,
Yeah.
because he is illuminating himself. And as you stand in his light, what do you see more clearly? Yourself. So this like
Right.
hand in hand of self, and I think we bypass that when we just seek knowledge and systems and quick life hacks and just get my wife to listen to me. And if you just 3 easy steps to a more peaceful Catholic household, about like all these quick, it's crap. Because the real work that I've learned, the real painstaking work is not ordering my home, ordering my wife, and bringing order, not giving her orders. Although I can do that if I want to. Like bringing like all these things, it's actually the hardest work is self-knowledge. So I just want to say yes.
Yes.
It's my podcast, Sam, and I'm just going to say it. No, it's your podcast. All right. I wanted to ask you this question though. I've been working for, in and around Fraternis since 2008, working with and around men that are much better than myself. And one of the primary charisms of this brotherhood of Fraternis has been the formation of young men by their fathers, by the brothers of a community, really initiating their sons into, virtuous masculinity. So with a lot of those guys, what we're doing is recognizing our own deficiency in our formation, ourselves. Like it's sort of like entrusting the solution to the problem. Like the men that are poorly formed are now taking ownership of forming the next generation. So we're dealing with our own wounds, insecurities, and all stuff, but then we're trying to raise up sons so that they don't have to pass through those things in the same way. Because it is a myth, and this is wrong. There's sort of this underlying thing in convert culture, which you and I are part of, that you have to do the Augustine to become Saint Augustine, which is not true. It is better to maintain purity and become a saint from good formation there's no necessary evil when it comes to holiness. So we want our sons to pass through this time as solid men without needing to experience sin. That's a fallacy. I called. Who's the author of the book? He does like parts therapy, litanies of the heart.
Oh yeah, Jerry Crete, Dr.
Yeah.
Jerry Crete.
So I called. I called him, and he's like, "Why do you want to talk?" I'm like, "I just want to talk." And we ended up talking for like an hour and a half. Because what I've been putting together is trying to like, what are the stages? Because there's a lot of beautiful, brilliant history about the stages of a man's growth. Because this is the reality of being man: is that we're a baby, or an infant, or a toddler, we're a child, we're an adolescent, we're a young adult. In each one of those stages, actually, there's physiological, there's hormonal, there's all sorts of stuff, and that's how we're being formed. And what I was asking Dr. Crate is, you work with a lot of broken men, and I was telling about in Leaving Boyhood Behind, the idea is that to become a man is to be initiated into manhood. And I was observing as I read his books and I read his work and experience things like Bob Schuchts, JP2 Healing Center. What they're usually doing, and you even brought it up in your example, is almost always these reactions in the way they are in their current setting. They're retroactively looking back at a child, themselves as a child in something that happened. And yes. I describe good healing as a sort of retroactive rite of passage, because what a rite of passage initiation does is to bring you from insecurity to security in a healthy way. And when someone has a wound, a bad, this bad thing, this pain in their life, it's so often in their childhood, and they go back and Dr. Crate, that whole parts therapy stuff is really beautiful. Go back and in a sense talk and understand what was going on in that time so that you can not be stuck there. So in the same way, initiation is to make sure you're not stuck in childhood. It seems like what a lot of therapy and counseling does is to go back and sort of, hey, that kid is stuck back there. Let's initiate him. Let's bring him from insecurity to security. And he said, I never thought about it that way. And I said, well, that's the problem. You counselors, you therapy people, I need you to help formulate and give the advice to men so that they can make sure their sons get past that spot, that they don't get stuck in those same old ruts. And we know that fathers can pass on the same ruts and pass on the same wounds. But in your time, and I know it's only a couple years now, what's the advice that you're seeing, like a very common corollaries with dealing with men that is this pain and wound, particularly from fathers, something that we fathers can do now instead of leaving it to you, 20 years later when our kids get in constant arguments with his wife. What are those sort of retroactive rites of passage that you've had to deal with a lot with your counseling business or practice? It's called practice. That you can give us advice now. I don't know if that question makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think there's two big wounds that I see in a lot of guys that I think would they come up a lot, I guess. One is not being allowed to feel. A lot of guys are told from very young that they have to shut down any and all feeling. So they go through life in this kind of numbed out state, completely detached from their emotional life. Their emotions are still there. They're just completely disconnected from them and are repressing them through a lot of culturally acceptable forms for men, such as, your phone. It can be the lowest threshold way of numbing your emotions. Watching YouTube shorts without end or whatever. A lot of guys escalate that to pornography, alcohol, any number of things. But it all comes down to this one thing of avoiding your feelings. Because feeling feels dangerous. Mm-hmm. Feeling feels shameful. Feeling feels scary. And the list goes on. But people will go to tremendous lengths to avoid their emotions. And yet if you look at the holiest men, they're very in tune with their emotions. King David, the Psalms, he's all over the place. Sometimes even within the same psalm, he's praising God, thanking God, and then the next minute he's down in the depths of despair. Mm-hmm. And then in another psalm, he might be raging because God's seemingly blessing his enemies while he's struggling and facing all of this pain. And then all of a sudden there'll be a turn and he's praising God again. It's like he's all over the place. But the point is he felt it all. And he bared his heart almost to the world because these psalms made their way into public worship. So he wasn't even ashamed of these ups and downs that he experienced. He was like, it's holy. It's good to feel all these feelings. And I think this is why scripture says David was a man after God's own heart. Why? Because I think God feels things deeply. You look at Jesus, right? You saw the full spectrum of human emotion in Jesus' life. From grief and sadness to anger and even a little bit of aggression, right? Tossing tables and stuff. I mean, that was not a mild, meek act, right? And so Jesus shows us the full spectrum of human emotion is present. He wept at the tomb of Lazarus and everyone said, look how much he loved him. How much emotion he had for his friend. And so that's one big wound, I think, is that men are told they can't feel. But the Sacred Heart is it's a heart that felt it all and was strong and could hold all of the full spectrum of emotion. Now, does that mean we weep all over the place and, can't handle anything? Absolutely not.
Right.
But it can lead to all kinds of addictions and forms of unhealth when we're completely detached from our emotional life. So that's one big wound I see. The other one, I think that's really significant for a lot of men, is the opposite in the sense that they're drowning in emotion. Their fathers never gave them a push. Their fathers never challenged them to face discomfort. Their fathers never taught them to face their fears. And that is absolutely just as necessary. So on the one hand, you have people who can't feel, and so they're just told to put on a brave face and soldier on. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are so paralyzed because they're feeling everything all at once, and no one ever taught them how to face that. Yeah. And gave them the nudge when they needed the nudge. In a loving way. It doesn't have to be cruel or hateful, but no, you're going to do this. I know you don't like it, but you're going to do it because it's good for you.
Yeah. And I will be with you. I'm gonna bless you on the other side of it. It's gonna hurt. And
exactly.
You're gonna get through it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, and the last one I think is just like feelings like it might seem paradoxical, but feeling safe with men like is so important. Like often there's like this hazing culture among men where like you mock and humiliate people, you put them down, and like somehow this is supposed to create like a lasting bond. You know, you see this on sports teams and coaches like mocking people or whatever, and like no, that's not healthy. That is not healthy.
Yeah.
Like I love you, son. I love you with every fiber of my being, and I would lay my life down for you for an instant. But I'm also going to challenge you in this moment to like do something you don't want to do. Like boys need that. They need to know that there's expectations and they need to be held to it.
Yeah. To your yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think actually this is where, and this is a constant paradigm, you know, that I'm looking at things through, because I think we are formed, we are initiated. That, and when I keep using that word initiation, I mean, that's the language the church uses to bring you into herself. It is when you are truly yourself. It's still you, but you're allowing the guidance of something outside of you to pull you into something bigger, right? So
yes,
so things like, I would argue like hazing is the disordered initiation of something like Lent.
Right.
Of something where you're gaining, or friends that have, and sometimes when I'm dealing with guys, they're like, "Oh, he's just so touchy. He didn't get a joke." I'm like, "No. Wait a second." Because when there's a group of friends around, and they make fun of, "Hey, it's Jason. He writes books," and they actually know me, and I love them, and they love me, and they're keeping my ego in check, right? So there can be a truth to that, where because we know each other, but you know when someone else enters that and they're actually not one of you, and the reason you're putting them down is evil, is sin, is that you would like them to be below you. You're not helping their ego. You're actually just putting your foot on their neck. That's what you're doing. It's different from a loving. So anyway, that I agree that the you know, that's the biggest bridge in fraternities. The problem is getting men to trust one another, because I had one young man tell me the other day, well, he's a young father, and so he's not 16, you know, 22, 23, got a kid or two. He's like, I'm tired of being in groups of men where I feel like everyone's interviewing each other to see like, where are you on these things? And I wish we could just get to trust quicker. I'm like, well, you know what? That's work too. So why don't you show up and don't go to the internet? I'm fascinated with you. You know, you're talking about, because as soon as you said, and I have a wide array of, you know, friends and people that I can hear people. You say, well, they're not allowed to feel. Yep, there it goes, the emotions. And what I'm finding in Catholic circles, and especially back to that manosphere, when they speak of emotions, they're actually they have been formed by a post-Enlightenment secular view of emotions that, for me, is healed especially by Aquinas and by the Church's perennial teaching of what the passions and emotions actually are. Because what they hear, you know, in the Enlightenment, it was emotions are subjective experience. And we just talked about this last night with John Cutterback. So if podcast listeners are tired of this, I'm sorry. But the Enlightenment said anything that's subjective is not true data. We have to toss it out. And anyone who really wants to get to empirical knowledge has to get rid of the fluff. And people talk about emotions as if they are not important. But it's like, no, they are. So last night, you know, we're talking with some young men. I asked them, is anger good? And they said no. I said, what are you talking about? Who gave you anger?
Right.
God gave you anger. So the key is not, you know, but they will define the emotions as something that must simply be overcome. And we speak of passions in the man. We speak of passions only as things to be overcome, which is wrong. It's absolutely wrong. The passions have to be integrated. They have to be formed because they are your quickest, you know, kind of the Thomistic lens is your passions and your emotions. When they're integrated and well-trained and you're listening to them, like a good husband listens to his wife, when you actually hear them and what they're saying, they're your quickest access to reality that you have, you know?
Yes,
and so anger, for example, is the desire to make something right that you perceive as wrong. So in your example, the guy that bumped you, okay, maybe he shouldn't have bumped you, but then you can actually when you really understand what the passion is for and it's integrated in yourself and you have self-knowledge, you can understand, I feel anger, and that's all right. I don't have to respond to its first prompts. You know, if it wants to react in a certain way, well, I know it's not, my anger is not well trained. So then I need to, so on both of those extremes, not being able to feel and then feeling too much. I have a good friend who I would say this is a man of wisdom. He's ushered in children. I say this all the time. Men who have raised adult children and maintained that relationship. Those are the men I look to, because that's a form of, and he says, the Catholic circles have got, most of them have it. And by the way, he is a really traditionalist Catholic. He says that the Catholic circles, especially the trads, have this all wrong because they don't know how to talk about the passions in a way that makes them sound, that makes them understood as created by God, as good, and as something that must be integrated. It is only something that's overcome, which is not true. It's not true. I mean, there's something that can't master you, but they're not something that is dismissed and subjugated completely, because the more you can listen accurately to your emotions and your passions, you actually gain an angelic knowledge, because life becomes intuited. You in an instant understand the reality of a situation in a way that your reason and your intellect is slower. Like, I got to reason and think through and A, B, and C. Whereas if you have well-trained passions and emotions, things that taste good immediately. Things that are evil feel evil immediately. It's when we don't have the self-knowledge and we don't either let ourselves feel or we let our feelings run amok. Those are lack of integration. That's like a father who either is a tyrant over his family and just rules them with an iron fist and they're never allowed to feel, or the other opposite side, the father who is completely passive and lets his, children and perhaps his wife, just run amok. So that's interesting. That's been my observation. I'm not as well trained, but I think the dismissal perhaps of what we would call the therapeutic and the dismissal of any conversation about emotions, I don't think it's framed at all today in a Catholic intellectual framework, which is, this was a deep dive into the Summa because of another project I was working on. Like, wow, Aquinas has a lot to say. He always, in all of the discussion of the passions, he defends them first. He defends pleasure. He defends anger. He praises the goodness of all the emotions first, so he knows what they're for. Whereas I think we bypass that in most conversations. It's, I feel sad. Well, buck up. Opposed to like, well, why are you feel that? When you know that, like, that's why Augustine was so holy, because he knew why these things were making him sad. Because I'm attached to lust, Sorry, any comments?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's.
I gotta get going.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
All right, Sam. This has been a prolonged but long delayed conversation. I hope to have you back. I'd like to ask you to return at some point and really break open some of those things for fathers and how we're actually going to, help our children integrate those emotions. I have some thoughts on how they're happening, because it's different in the modern setting, and posting memes of medieval Christians is not going to help us. So Sam, thank you for all your work. I'm sorry you're not the Catholic gentleman anymore, but you're a Catholic gentleman in my eyes.
Can I be a Catholic gentleman?
Yeah, you can be a Catholic gentleman, just not the. So thank you for being on, and we appreciate you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much. God bless. It's been a pleasure.